paper, Genesis, Rocks, Minerals, and the Geochemical Origin of Life. And this is a paper on the origin of life. You can see it right there. If you read on in this paper, it says, researchers on the origin of life now conclude that rocks and minerals must have played key roles in virtually every phase of life's emergence.
Everybody correcting him, he still says that, well, you believe, evolutionists believe we came from a rock, except that no evolutionists ever believed that. Nobody, not one, not ever.
This scientific paper says here that you can see, it says life and rocks may have co-evolved on Earth. And it goes on to say that rocks beget life.
And instead resort to your typical misrepresentations of science, like claiming I think life came from a rock, no matter how many times I explain to you that those are stupid things to say.
I don't believe that at all. I don't believe we came from rocks.
Another dawn, and minerals were eroded from those rocks, and then we came into existence based on those minerals getting eroded and rearranging themselves into elements that would make it so that life could come into existence. You owe your life to rock.
This textbook says, where does life come from? Spontaneous generation became a theory that was accepted for several hundred years.
The Earth starts out as a hot ball of rock, which then cools, creating gas clouds, which rain on the rocks over deep time, and turn them into a chemical soup, which spontaneously generates itself into a simple, single cell.
People believe, even today still, that life came from non-living matter, even though it was proven wrong here. In the mid-1800s, Oracle Louis Pasteur, a French chemist, provided enough evidence to disprove the theory of spontaneous generation. It was replaced with biogenesis. So you have the theory of biogenesis, which coincides to the modern theory of cell theory. And
is the theory that all living organisms are composed of cells. There are 3 principles of cell theory. The first principle is that the cells are the smallest units of life. This means that the cell is the smallest unit of life.
Not one cell in the laboratory has ever been evolved from an artificial protocell or seen to evolve from something other than a cell in nature. Cells come from pre-existing cells, which means that all cells had to be created.
If we went smaller and looked at just an organelle within a cell, such as the nucleus or the mitochondria, or any other organelle, they are not capable of the processes required for life alone. They cannot exist on their own and must work together to be able to do so within the cell, making the cell the smallest unit of life.
They have to exist together as a unit, meaning that it is irreducibly complex. If you remove one piece, then you can't have any of it. So the only way to get life is to have a cell, and the only way to have a cell is for it to be created or to come from a pre-existing cell.
The second principle of cell theory is that all living things are composed of cells. If you look at any living thing, you will find it is composed of cells. If you look at a bacteria, they are living and made up of a cell. If you look at a plant or an animal, they are living and made up of many cells. If you look at a virus, they are not alive and are not made up of cells. The third principle of cell theory is that cells come from pre-existing cells. Cells are formed by cell division. A cell will divide to form 2 smaller cells, whether through binary fission in prokaryotes, or through fission, mitosis, or meiosis in eukaryotes.
one of the 3 principles of that cell theory is that cells come from pre-existing cells. So we've known this for over 200 years. Why do these textbooks teach that life can come from non-living matter?
It rained on the rocks over millions of years and turned them into soup, and the soup came alive. And they call that science and put it in a science journal. I'd call that a fairy tale and put it in the garbage.
It says here on the next page, if living things can come only from other living things, how did life on Earth begin? Scientists hypothesize about 5 billion years ago the Earth's solar system was a whirling mass of gas and dust. They hypothesized the sun and the planets were formed from this mass. It's estimated the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old, a year more than 3.5 billion years old, containing fossils of once living organisms. And where do these living organisms come from?
Life in the laboratory. Over hundreds of years they've been trying to do this, so that would only prove that it takes intelligence to create life. It's impossible that life could just spontaneously generate itself from non-living matter naturally with no cause.
In the 1950s by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey. They sought to demonstrate how the building blocks of proteins, what we call amino acids, could form under natural conditions by creating a simulated theoretical atmosphere. The Miller and Urey's experiments suggested how mixtures of organic compounds necessary for life could have arisen from simpler compounds present on the primitive Earth. But this is simply not true.
Energy from the sun lightning Earth's heat triggered chemical reactions early in Earth's history. The newly formed molecules washed into Earth's ancient oceans and became a part of what is called the primordial soup. Russian scientists named Alexander Oparin suggested the earlier atmosphere in the Earth had no oxygen but was made up of the gases ammonia, hydrogen, methane, and water vapor, and he hypothesized these gases would have combined to form the more complex compounds found in living things. And then using these gases and conditions, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey set up an experiment and produced organic compounds, which were not alive, but they were organic. You could use them to make something that is alive, which they did not successfully do. They just produced the organic compound.
Every good biochemist knows that amino acids will not form in the presence of oxygen, and if amino acids are present and exposed to oxygen, it will break them down. Thus, oxygen was excluded from this experiment, and it was assumed by early scientists that advocated for spontaneous generation that the early Earth must have had a reducing atmosphere or non-oxygen atmosphere. This is from the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society in 1982. Geologists, they say, know from their analysis of the oldest known rocks that the oxygen level of the early atmosphere had to be much higher than previously calculated. From the journal Geology in 1982, they say there is no scientific proof that Earth ever had a non-oxygen atmosphere such as evolutionists require. Earth's oldest rocks contain evidence of being formed in the presence of an oxygen atmosphere. The experiment did not produce anything resembling mixtures of organic compounds necessary for life.
There's so many different structures you're going to have to solve the homochirality problem for. You have to solve it not for one amino acids, but you have to solve it for a bunch of amino acids. If you solve it for the amino acids, then you have to solve it for the sugar. For what class are you talking about? And for which molecule? To solve it for one molecule doesn't solve it for all the other molecules, even within the same class. So you solve it for one sugar, you still have all the other sugars you got to solve for. Solve it for one amino acid, you have 18 other amino acids you got to solve it. And amino acids don't hook together. How do you get sugars to hook together so that you can control the regio and stereochemistry? Remember I told you millions of different combinations in just a hexamer, just 6 of them. And that's using just a homopolymer of just one particular sugar.
Dr. David Green, with a PhD in biochemistry, says that the macromolecule-to-cell transition is a jump of fantastic dimensions which lies beyond the range of testable hypotheses. In this area, all is conjecture. Dr. Francis Crick, with a PhD in biophysics, says that an honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. New Scientist, Volume 163 says, how did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows. There's no known law of physics able to create information from nothing.